Today we continue our look at the 2008 presidential election, this time focusing on the Democratic nomination battle. Last episode we looked at the Republican nomination battle. I will link the video to that in the description along with earlier presidential elections we looked at starting with 1992 in this presidential election series here on Exploration and Analysis. This battle for the Democratic nomination will be one of the closest primary contests we've looked at, and it will last the longest. Several prominent names in the Democratic Party sought the nomination, thinking that this was the year where Republicans were particularly vulnerable. The war in Iraq in particular, and to a lesser extent the war in Afghanistan, had been going on longer than people expected, with more casualties than people expected. Republicans will see big losses in the midterm elections, losing both the House and the Senate in the wave year. Democrats smelled blood and hoped to capitalize on the weakness of the Republicans. So let's look at Bush's approval rating. As you can see, rather low approval numbers. That top one there is probably the best of the bunch with 38% to 59% disapproved. But most of these numbers are low to mid 30s with 20 to 30 points in between the approval and the disapproval. So Bush was definitely down on his popularity, and Democrats saw this. And this was the period of time, late 2006, early 2007, where they would be making their decisions on whether or not they would run. And they would see these numbers and they would very much smell blood. So Howard Dean is going to take over the Democratic National Committee at this time, and he'll have a lot of ideas that will go against the grain of conventional wisdom. He sought to build the party infrastructure in areas where Democrats were weak, even if there was little chance of winning, and not to focus merely on swing districts. So the next two congressional elections, 2006 and 2008, Democrats would be competitive and in some cases win in states where they had been weak in the past, like Indiana, Utah, and Idaho. He felt that there was value in making the entire country competitive for the Democrats and to build the party in places where it didn't have much presence. So as part of this concept, he sought to employ more caucuses in the nomination process, especially in rural states. Caucuses were kind of community meetings run by the party, and he felt that they could build more sense of community among Democrats and improve networking. So perhaps his own experience in Vermont with New England town meetings would partially inspire this move. So in this 2008 nomination battle, we're going to see a lot more caucuses than we have in the past, and I think that's going to affect the results to some extent. So in the last two election cycles, the Democratic tickets were the Gore-Lieberman and Kerry Edwards tickets, respectively. And there was talk maybe of Gore or possibly Kerry having another run. In 2004, Lieberman had waited until Gore made his decision before announcing his candidacy and was willing to step down if Gore did indeed decide to run. Now this year, 2008, Edwards is going to make no such indication of doing the same thing for Kerry, and he's going to express early interest in running whether or not Kerry decides to do so. And Kerry's going to eventually decide not to do so, and he's going to bow out. And Gore is going to eventually bow out, although he's going to deliberate for a little bit while longer before making that decision. Lieberman, for his part, is going to be out of favor with Democratic primary voters, as he had lost his Senate primary to the dovish Ned Lamont in Connecticut in 2006 and only retained his Senate seat by circumventing the primary process and running as an independent. So he's going to really have no interest in running for president as in the primary process for the Democrats. So let's talk about the candidates who are going to run, their backgrounds and policy positions, as like I said, they're going to think that they have a pretty good shot of winning in this cycle. So the aforementioned John Edwards, we'll start with him. He's going to be the youngest of this group, even though he had run for president before and he had been the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats in 2004. So he came from a fairly humble upbringing. He had made much of being the son of a mill worker. He took on economic populist positions, strongly supporting unions, taking protectionist policies on trade, and seeking to make college more accessible to poor and working class families. He would have an aggressive anti-poverty platform, and he had a potential weakness, though. He was not as experienced as some of his rivals, only having served one term in the Senate, as he decided to step down in 2006 and not run again. He had also voted for the Iraq War, although now he was disavowing that position and stating unequivocally that he had made a mistake in doing so. And while he had a charming demeanor, it sometimes was laid on so thick that it could be a turnoff. So in small doses, I think people found him rather appealing and charming, but in large doses, he came across as maybe a little bit too smooth, something like a good salesman, and I think, voters were rather weary of him. Now, Chris Dodd hoped to be a little bit more successful than his fellow Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman was in 2004. Dodd was the quintessential Washington insider, being a second-generation senator. His father, Thomas Dodd, had been a two-term senator, as well as a member of the House of Representatives representing Connecticut. Chris Dodd was first elected to the House in the post-Watergate wave year of 1974, and then he was elected to the Senate in 1980 in what was otherwise a bad year for Democrats. So Chris Dodd was close to Ted Kennedy and much of the Kennedy family, and while he didn't get Ted's endorsement in this 2008 presidential election, he would get the endorsement of two of Ted's sons, including Patrick Kennedy, who had been a representative from Rhode Island at this time in the House of Representatives. So Chris Dodd had run for minority leader in 1995 and was generally supported by the more progressive wing of the party, but ultimately he lost that nomination or that position to Tom Daschle, who was supported by the more moderate wing of the party. So Dodd played a big hand in passing the Family and Medical Leave Act, and he was the chairman of the Banking Committee, and this would be an area of expertise for him. So one of the most impressive resumes of any presidential candidate I've seen belonged to Bill Richardson in this year of 2008. Usually a presidential candidate will lack something in their experience. So we've seen a lot of legislators who had never been an executive, and Bob Dole might be an example of that, or we've seen the likes of Chris Dodd or Joe Lieberman. So we often get people who had been in the legislature a long time but no executive experience. But on the other hand, we sometimes will get governors who had never dealt with national or international issues. So George W. Bush would be an example of that, and we would see others fit that bill as well. But Richardson would have all the bases covered. When it came to national legislative matters, he had been in the House of Representatives for 14 years, where he worked his way up to being the Democratic deputy whip, and he helped pass NAFTA. So he then was appointed by Bill Clinton to serve as UN ambassador, and as UN ambassador, he was able to get diplomatic and foreign policy experience. He then was appointed to a cabinet position as he became Secretary of Energy, so here he had the chance to run a federal executive agency. So then he was elected governor of New Mexico, and he had the chance to run a state. And at this point in time, in 2008, he was in the middle of his second term as governor, having been elected twice in New Mexico. So one might expect somebody with such credentials would get serious consideration and attention by Democratic primary voters and the media. And despite having an Anglophone name, he had Hispanic heritage and some American Indian heritage. So he was more of a consensus builder and a diplomat, so he didn't put forth detailed policy proposals, but instead sought to use the presidency to facilitate the development of policies through getting the different players involved and trying to work out agreements. And that was something of his specialty. So another candidate with impressive credentials was Joe Biden. He was also a fixture in Washington as a senator from Delaware. He had a relatively short commute back and forth from Washington to Delaware and could attend more Washington-based activities like interviews or mingling events without it interfering with much of his home constituency activity. But that being said, he didn't have a permanent home in Washington, rare for a senator, as he commuted back and forth to Delaware, often using Amtrak. Biden was first elected to the Senate in 1972 and was the youngest senator at that time. He had chaired important committees, gaining foreign policy experience as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He also had chaired the Judiciary Committee during the hearings of Clarence Thomas. Biden would go on to get more votes in one presidential election than any other candidate in history. So let's see how much attention his candidacy gets in 2008. But like Edwards and Dodd, Biden also had voted for the Iraq War, but he had a proposal moving forward to transition Iraq into a federal system where there would be kind of a three-state solutions where Sunnis, Shiites, and Kurds would each control a section of Iraq. So he hoped that this would be a compromise, as the three communities had been fighting for control of the country. And although Biden had an impressive resume and decent expertise, he was running against other candidates with impressive resumes and decent expertise like Dodd and Richardson. So there were three candidates that seemed to be making a very similar pitch. And yet a fourth candidate would run on experience and expertise, and that was Hillary Clinton. In truth, she didn't have the resume of either Richardson or Biden, or even Dodd for that matter, but nonetheless she championed herself as the experienced candidate and wasn't really challenged by the media or the other candidates for that title, at least not aggressively challenged. There were a segment of voters that really liked her, and if she said she was the experienced candidate, they accepted it without thinking twice about Richardson, Biden, or Dodd. She also had voted for the the Iraq War and would face the same questions about that vote that John Kerry did. Like Kerry, she tried to distinguish between voting to give the president authority and voting for a war declaration, although the Constitution gives Congress sole authority to declare war and not the president. As for her experience, she was in her second term as a senator, which isn't nothing but significantly less than Biden, Dodd, or Richardson. As First Lady, she was an informal advisor to her husband. There was one interview where Bill Clinton was running in 1992 where she said that if people voted for Bill, they would get her too. Although later on, the Clintons downplayed this, and she kind of was more of a background figure in his administration, with the exception of one task that she was formally given during Bill Clinton's presidency, and that was to come up with a healthcare reform proposal. So she was unsuccessful at coming up with anything that would pass the Congress and was criticized for her leadership style during that effort. But she had a lot of name recognition. Supporters that she had were gung-ho for her, and she got off to an early lead. The name that kind of surprised me was Mike Gravel. He had been a two-term senator from Alaska in the 60s and 70s. Now, I had been following politics since the early 90s, and I had not heard of him at this point in time. I had always thought of Alaska as a Republican stronghold and didn't even realize that Democrats could win two terms there at any point in time. But indeed, Mike Gravel did. But he would end up losing the primary as he sought his third term. He was a rather dovish senator during the Vietnam War and took a dovish position on Iraq here in 2008. He also had proposed expanding direct democracy in the way of more referendums as part of the political process. And then Barack Obama was another candidate. He was a first-term senator from Illinois after having been a state senator and a community organizer. He had the least experience in the field, but he was dubbed a rising star early on due to impressive speeches like the one he gave at the Democratic Convention in 2004 when he was just a Senate candidate. A lot of people thought Obama would wait for a later year to run, but as his star started to rise, he saw this as his moment, and he could claim to have been against the Iraq War from the beginning. So anti-war Democrats, they might decide that what good is experience if it only leads to bad policies, and it's better to have an inexperienced candidate if he's got the better policies. And Barack Obama would hope that enough Democrats would believe that and would support him. But if anti-war Democrats wanted somebody who was in Congress and had voted against the war, they had a chance to support such a candidate, as Dennis Kucinich was going to give it a second run. He had been unequivocally against the war. He was otherwise supportive of progressive causes with strong positive ratings from environmental groups, peace groups, and organized labor. He had been mayor of Cleveland, where he fought corruption and organized crime before becoming a progressive stalwart in the House. If progressive wanted a true blue believer in progressive causes, they could support Dennis Kucinich and get a person that really believed in the stuff that they believed in. So let's take a look at some of these summer polls as we get some numbers from June through August, and they're pretty consistent across the board. It looks like Hillary Clinton is in the lead with Barack Obama about a dozen points behind her in most of these polls, give or take, with John Edwards in third place, solidly behind him, and the other candidates still stuck in single digits. And like I said, those numbers seem to be pretty consistent, and I think it's important when looking at polls. You know, there are those that will say, oh, polls, you know, they're worthless. Why spend so much time on them? And I do spend some time on them on these videos, but I do think when looking at them the right way, I think that they can be very valuable. And the right way is by looking at a number of different polls from different companies and then seeing patterns and kind of figuring that the averages of these polls are probably around where things are at. Sometimes the averages can be way off, but most of the time I think that they can be pretty accurate. Now, with these numbers, I think it's pretty interesting that there are a couple of polls that have Al Gore's name in there, as I guess this was still at a point where he hadn't completely closed the door on running, and you can see that he was not necessarily in the lead. He was still, I guess, in third place. He would have been slightly ahead of Edwards, but you can kind of see where he took votes away, and he took a little bit of votes away from everybody, but I think he took more away from Obama and Edwards than he did from Hillary Clinton. With Obama in second, he was not too far behind, but he was behind, and he needed to figure out ways to close that gap. He had a lot of support from youths, and there was definite enthusiasm there, and polls and crowds showed that people in their late teens and early 20s supported him in much higher numbers than the other candidates. And with that in mind, Obama would have more social media presence. Social media was just starting to become a thing in 2008, but it hadn't yet really spread to older demographics. It was still something that mostly young people engaged in. Obama's team made full use of social media, helping to solidify his support with young people. The other candidates were much further behind in getting their social media operations going. And Obama would take a tour of the world and visit numerous leaders from different countries. He hoped that that would show people that he was working on his foreign policy and not taking that for granted. So let's take a look at some of the fundraising. And we see Obama, while not quite where Hillary Clinton is, he's not too shabby, and he was past her in the second quarter. So we see in this first quarter, Hillary Clinton slightly above Obama. Now, she had some money left over from her most recent Senate campaign. That's where that plus 10 million came from. But they were pretty close as far as how much they raised that quarter. And in the second quarter, Obama actually outraised her, but then she went back to outraising him in the third quarter. Now, as we look at those other candidates, now Richardson, in a normal year, like if we looked at the last couple of presidential elections, his fundraising numbers would not look too shabby. But this year, we're just going to see a lot more money being raised, and Richardson and Edwards as well kind of had what would normally be considered okay numbers, but here they're just pretty far behind where Obama and Clinton are. They're just able to raise much more money. Obama through his internet fundraising and through his support from small donors, and Clinton with her establishment support. And we see Biden and Dodd really kind of much further behind, especially Biden. He really wasn't able to raise as much money in this campaign. And we're going to see Dennis Kucinich propose a new idea called the Department of Peace. The thought was to devote an entire agency towards spreading peace in the world. And it was something new and different, and really reflected what kind of candidate Kucinich was. And let's take a look at healthcare. In any kind of Democratic primary, healthcare is always going to be a big issue that's going to be raised a lot, talked about a lot. So let's kind of compare where these different candidates stood. Now, Dennis Kucinich is going to be for a single-payer kind of universal healthcare, what would today be referred to as Medicare for all. They didn't really use that terminology back then, but that's basically what he was supporting. The other candidates really weren't for that. Hillary Clinton and John Edwards were for, yes, expanding Medicaid, expanding the government presence in healthcare, but still keeping a large private insurance apparatus in place. And they were both for mandates for individuals and employers, as well as a public option that people can buy into if they don't like any of the private plans. Now, neither Obama or Biden supported mandates, so that's going to be an important difference. Now, later on, when what would become Obamacare would pass, it would have those mandates in there, but it's interesting to note that during the primaries, Obama did not support the mandates, and he spoke out against them as he was debating Hillary Clinton on that issue. Now, Biden is going to be hawkish on the Darfur issue. The conflict in the Darfur region of Sudan was really heating up at this time, with the Sudanese government killing large numbers of people in the region. Biden took a hawkish position, even stating a willingness to use troops to prevent a genocide in that region. So now let's take a look at some early fall polls, and the first two polls there are national polls, and they're really not showing too much difference from the ones that we showed from the summer. Hillary Clinton's still in the lead, and that second one there, the ARG poll, it looks like she's even expanding that lead, going above 50% for the first time, with Obama in second and Edwards in third, and the rest of the candidates trailing more further behind. But we see in Iowa a little bit of a different dynamic. Yes, Clinton is still in the lead, but it's much closer closer. We see Clinton, Obama, and Edwards clustered much closer together. And we see Biden and Richardson, while not doing great, doing a little bit better in Iowa than they were nationally, especially Richardson there, as he's in upper single digits in Iowa. So he's, generating a little bit more support there. New Hampshire, though, is closer to those national numbers with Clinton in first, Obama in second, Edwards in third. But it looks like Richardson, though, again, a little bit better in New Hampshire maybe than he is in nationally. And then the last poll, there's another Iowa poll, and that shows the same thing, a closer cluster, and this time with Clinton and Obama much closer together, and Edwards in third, and then we see Richardson at 7%, Biden with 5% there. So Biden and Richardson, especially Richardson, a little bit stronger in Iowa, and then Richards stronger in New Hampshire, but still they are in fourth and fifth place respectively. So Barack Obama is going to be giving a famous speech at the Jefferson-Jackson dinner. That's an annual event that prominent Democrats attend, and he's going to impress a lot of people with some of the things he says. So that will be the speech where he makes the "yes, we can" remark that's going to be repeated often throughout the rest of the campaign. And he's also going to use the line, "This isn't about white America or black America. This is about the United States of America." So that's going to impress a lot of Democrats and really be pretty inspirational, winning people over, and that's going to be important moving forward. And perhaps that was a factor in him getting a big celebrity endorsement at this time, as Oprah Winfrey is going to announce her support of Barack Obama. She really didn't get involved in politics too much before this point, but she was a major celebrity. A lot of women watched her show and listened to the things that she said. And when she decided, really for the first time in her career, to make a strong public stance in support of a candidate, I think a lot of people took note of that, and she announced her support for Barack Obama in this race. So then we're going to have a debate in late October, and Hillary Clinton is really going to stumble and start to draw attacks from different places. Chris Dodd is really going to hit her hard. And really the factor was she got asked a question about her position about something that was going on in New York with Eliot Spitzer giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. And it wasn't so much that issue per se, I think, but her inability to really take a position, to kind of take a stance. She seemed to be straddling the fence, trying to take both sides of that issue. And I think it brought to people's attention her statements about the war in Iraq and many other issues as well, where she really didn't seem to stick to firm principles, and she seemed to do this thing where she didn't take firm stances, and it kind of showed in this particular debate, and I really think it kind of hurt her there in that late October debate. Let's take a look at some more polls as we move towards the end of the year. Here in 2007, we see a New Hampshire poll, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but these poll numbers are supposed to be color coordinated, so that light green, that kind of teal color is New Hampshire, whereas the pink is Iowa, and the national polls are sort of that kind of grayish, kind of bluish color there. So we see this New Hampshire poll, Clinton in first with 35, Barack Obama with 21, Edwards at 15. So that really hasn't changed too much, but we do see Richardson move up to double digits in this Boston Globe poll for the first time. So he's at 10% in New Hampshire. And then the two Iowa polls here, first a CBS poll, and Richardson's going to move up to double digits in that one as well. And we really see Clinton, Edwards, and Obama clustered. Now Edwards is in second and Obama is in third, but they're all really within the margin of error of each other, all three of those candidates. And we see Biden in fifth place with 4% and Kucinich with 1%. Then we see a ABC Washington Post poll where Obama is actually in the lead, Clinton's in second, Edwards is in third, Richardson in fourth with 11%. So Obama takes the lead in that poll. But again, we have two Iowa polls and we've got three candidates all within the margin of error. And then we have this Rasmussen poll from South Carolina, where we see Clinton in the lead and Obama in second, Edwards in third. Remember, Edwards had won South Carolina in 2004, and he's hoping to do so again, but this Rasmussen poll is showing that he's still very far behind in a kind of distant third there. And then we see a national poll, a USA Today Gallup poll, Clinton still in the lead, Obama second, Edwards third, and then finally we get another New Hampshire poll, a CNN poll, and we see it very close indeed, Clinton 31, Obama 30. So New Hampshire for the first time is really close here. It's within the margin of error. So the race is really starting to tighten up as we get towards the latter part of 2007. So we finally get to January 3rd in the Iowa caucus, and we could see Barack Obama winning the Iowa caucus with 35% of the vote, getting 16 delegates. Now, again, they were all kind of clustered pretty close together. We see John Edwards coming in second in the vote with 31%, Hillary Clinton in third with 30%. Now, the delegate count is going to be a little bit different. Hillary Clinton is going to get one more delegate than John Edwards, and that has to do with where they got their votes and within the different precincts. And similarly with Richardson, Biden, and Dodd, the reason why their numbers are so low is the way Iowa does its caucuses. Remember, these are meetings that happen in different communities, and any candidate that doesn't get 15%, basically those voters are asked to then support the other candidates that did get more than 15%. So in later years, they would have two counts in Iowa. When they did their caucus, they would have the first count, which would be how everybody voted when they initially came to the caucus, and then a second vote after all those votes got divvied up, and you'd produce different numbers. But here they would only produce the numbers of the final tally. So Richardson, Biden, and Dodd all had very low numbers because they didn't generally get 15% in the different precincts, so their voters were basically lost in any of those precincts. So shortly after the Iowa caucus results were announced, both Biden and Dodd are going to drop out. So neither candidate are going to feel like they have any path forward. They weren't able to get the fundraising up. And really, I think this is indicative of the fact that they just really weren't able to get the media attention. It seems like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in particular just got tons of media attention. And to a lot of voters, they thought that there were only two candidates running, so it's very hard for Biden or Dodd or even any of the other candidates really to get any kind of notice. So they would end up dropping out and leaving the race after the Iowa caucuses. So then we'd have the New Hampshire primary on January 8th, and Hillary Clinton is going to make a comeback. And I think I'm going to do a video at some point where I'm going to explore this idea of momentum, because I think that there's this maybe misconception that, once you win a small state, you're going to get momentum. And we did see that happen with John Kerry in 2004. He had kind of middling numbers in the polls. Then he won Iowa, and everything just fell into place with him, and he kind of won most of the states after that. But it doesn't always work out that way, and we see here Barack Obama winning Iowa. One would think he'd get some momentum. A lot of people were expecting him to then go on and win New Hampshire and kind of run away with it the way John Kerry did. But Hillary Clinton is going to end up bouncing back and winning New Hampshire. But notice again the delegate count. Now, Obama's team was very smart about how delegates were divvied up in each state, and they were very strategic with how they organized themselves. So as we see here, the delegates are actually tied, but Hillary Clinton is going to get a lot of momentum here because she was kind of given up for dead after coming in third in Iowa in the vote, but here she actually comes in first in the vote in New Hampshire, kind of an unexpectedly good result for her. And we see Edwards coming in a more distant third here in New Hampshire, with Richardson coming in fourth and Dennis Kucinich coming in fifth. So after the New Hampshire results, Bill Richardson is going to drop out. And again, I'll repeat what I said earlier, a candidate that had huge credentials, a very good resume, a great background, the kind of person that you would want to be taken seriously, but he just wasn't able to garner much media attention and much momentum at all. So he will end up dropping out after New Hampshire. And we saw his national poll numbers really weren't that high, so he didn't really see himself as having much of a path forward and much of a chance to win. So then we get to the Nevada caucuses on January 19th, and we're going to see Hillary Clinton win again as she gets 51% of the vote and Barack Obama with 46%. But again, if we look at the delegate count, Obama is actually going to get more delegates than Hillary Clinton out of Nevada. And I think the way I understand it is the way Nevada divvied up their delegates is it went by congressional district. So Obama did better in some of those rural districts in Nevada, whereas Hillary Clinton did better in the Las Vegas area, where she had support amongst a lot of the Hispanic community, a lot of the casino workers. But in any case, Obama was able to get one more delegate. Now, it was treated in the media like Hillary Clinton won, as she did get more votes. But if you're, counting up the delegates, and later on that's going to become very important, Clinton may be getting a little momentum here as the media is declaring her the winner. But ultimately, it's about who gets more delegates, and Obama has got one more delegate out of Nevada than Clinton. And then we're going to see Dennis Kucinich drop out shortly after that. Now, he had stuck around until pretty late in the process in 2004, but he's not going to do so this time, as there were some concerns that maybe he could have his congressional seat in jeopardy. So he's going to leave the presidential race at this point in time. And then we're going to see South Carolina, and we're going to see Obama bounce back in a major way, getting a huge victory with more than 50% of the vote, 55% of the vote, more than doubling Hillary Clinton's vote count there, and more than doubling her delegate count. So as we saw earlier, the delegates were pretty much tied in New Hampshire. He had actually had a small advantage in Nevada. He had a small advantage in Iowa. Now he's got a huge advantage out of South Carolina. So Obama is now in the lead in the delegate count, but and Hillary Clinton is behind him. And Edwards with a real disappointing showing. Remember, he had won South Carolina 4 years ago, and he was kind of hoping to win again, or at least come in second, but he's going to come in a more distant third, and that will be a disappointing showing for John Edwards. And then we have the Florida primary. Now, there would be a lot of drama with Florida. They had moved up in a spot in the primary calendar that the DNC did not want them to move up to. They had wanted more states to go in February, and they only wanted to have a small number of states go in January. So they basically told any state that if you go in January, you're going to lose your delegates. So Florida decided they were going to go in January, despite the DNC's warnings. And so it would be declared that they would lose their delegates. And Barack Obama decided not to campaign in Florida, and neither did John Edwards. So Hillary Clinton would end up winning Florida, but it was supposed to be just a beauty contest and not for any delegates. Now, later on, Hillary Clinton would complain about that and say, look, it's not fair to the Florida voters to disenfranchise them. It's a big state. It's a swing state. Why would we have them not have delegates? I got 50% of the vote there. I should be getting lots and lots of delegates from that. And Obama is going to say that, look, I didn't make up the rules, the DNC did. And when they said that Florida wasn't going to get delegates, I didn't put any resources in there. So why should I be penalized and have Hillary Clinton get all these delegates when everybody told me that Florida wasn't going to have any delegates? So it would be a major issue, moving forward, because the delegate count is going to end up being pretty close in this thing. And we're going to see John Edwards drop out there in late January. Somebody who was thought to have a lot of political skills. He certainly got off to an early start. He had a high stature from being the VP nominee 4 years earlier, but he just wasn't able to gain traction. Even he had a hard time getting much media attention and much of a momentum going during this campaign. So he's going to withdraw after his disappointing showing in South Carolina. So as we move into Super Tuesday, I want to note a certain number of things that I've alluded to a little bit so far, but I want to reiterate. So it's not like the Electoral College where it's winner take all, and what matters is whether a candidate wins the state or doesn't win the state. With these primary and caucuses, margins are going to matter, and the Obama team is going to be very good at figuring out the delegate system and maximizing their ability to rack up delegates using their resources, their networking, their online presence, and the enthusiasm many voters had for them. And we saw that a little bit so far. We saw that in a state like Nevada, where Clinton Clinton actually got more votes, but Obama's team figured out how to get more delegates and actually walked away from that caucus with more delegates, even if Hillary Clinton was declared the winner by her vote totals and by the media. So if the Obama team can target states that Hillary Clinton is not targeting, they can gain larger victories. They will particularly target caucus states where enthusiasm is an advantage, and the DNC was using more caucuses this year under Howard Dean's new philosophy and his new formula. So some of the states that the Obama team would target would be Republican states, but the Obama team would target the Democrats that are in those Republican states and try to figure out the ones that were most enthusiastic for Obama and turn them out. Sometimes you can have a Republican-dominated state where the smaller number of Democrats that live in those states are actually more liberal than you might think. And Hillary is going to focus on the larger states where Obama is going to hope to minimize the losses with closer margins if he is indeed going to lose some of these bigger states. So let's take a look at each state and how it broke down. So we're going to start with Alabama, and we're going to see Obama doing pretty well in the Deep South, and Alabama is going to be one where he's going to win, win about a 14-point margin. So in the red here, I'm going to have the delegate breakdown. So Obama's going to pick up 27 and Hillary 25. So pretty close in the delegates, pretty close in the margins, but Obama wins in Alabama. Now, Alaska is going to be an example of what I was kind of talking about before, where you have Obama going into this Republican state. They're holding a caucus, but the folks who are going to vote in that Democratic caucus are not necessarily going to be moderate to conservative. Think of Alaska as a state where you have a lot of adventurers or a lot of rugged individualists, a lot of environmentalists, a lot of outdoor enthusiasts. So not necessarily the establishment Democrat types that were finding Hillary Clinton appealing. So Obama is going to actually win a huge margin in Alaska, going to get a 3-1 victory, 75% to 25, getting 9-4 in the delegates. Clinton's going to get a modest victory in America Samoa and a victory in Arizona. Now, she's going to do very well in states that have a larger Hispanic presence, and we saw that a little bit in Nevada, and Arizona is going to be like that. So she's going to get a win, but not a blowout win, so the delegates will be somewhat close there. Now, Arkansas is going to be more of a blowout. It's going to be Hillary Clinton's, one of her home states, and I think Arkansas is going to be the state where she wins by the largest margins. So we see 70 to 26 there, so she is going to get a pretty sizable delegate margin there in Arkansas. Now, California is obviously a big state with a lot of delegates. It's going to be somewhat close, though. It's interesting, Hillary Clinton there winning by single digits, 51% to 43%, and Obama's actually going to win the white non-Hispanic vote in California, and he's going to win the black vote, but he's going to fail to win the Hispanic and Asian vote. So interesting to look at California. It's also interesting if you look at the California map by primary, Obama does win in a lot of the Bay Area, a lot of those more upscale liberal areas, around the middle coast area of California, but Hillary Clinton is going to do better in the southern half of California. The areas around Los Angeles and San Diego are going to be Hillary Clinton's strongholds, but Colorado is going to be a state a little like Alaska with a lot of outdoor enthusiasts. I'd say Colorado has a younger population, so the Democrats there are a little bit more liberal than they may be in other states, and that's also going to be a caucus state. So you see Obama getting a very large victory there in the Colorado caucus. Connecticut's going to be a close one. Obama's going to eke out a victory there by about 5 percentage points and get a few more delegates in Connecticut. Delaware, similarly, one of the northeastern states where Obama is going to manage to get a victory. Not a huge margin, but he is going to kind of win Delaware. Now, Georgia is going to be a large margin. It's going to be one of these deep southern states where Obama is very successful. So you see him getting a large victory and getting a big delegate delegate advantage out of Georgia. He's also going to do well in the Idaho caucus. We're going to see really large margins there in Idaho, larger than you might think. You might not think of Idaho as being an Obama stronghold, but I think it's one of these states. It's a caucus state. It's one of these western states, a mountainous state, a Rocky Mountain state, and Obama is going to seem to click with a certain contingent of voters. Now, remember, the Republican caucus is going on at the same time, so a lot of those conservatives in Idaho, a lot of those Mormons are going to be turning out for Romney, but that's neither here nor there for Obama. He's going to find the Democrats that are there, and he's going to turn them out. He's going to win by a very large margin in Idaho, just as he did in some of those other Rocky Mountain states that we looked at. And then Illinois, Obama's home state, you're going to see a large victory there, and he's going to get a significant number of delegates, so he's going to get a big advantage there. He's also going to get a big advantage in the Kansas caucus. So another one of these states, a Republican state, it's having a caucus. It's a smaller state, but he's going to find his supporters. There are some liberal pockets in Kansas. I don't know if it made a difference, but I know his mother came from Kansas, so he's going to get almost a 3-to-1 advantage over Hillary Clinton in Kansas. And she's going to win Massachusetts, so she's going to get a victory there, but not exactly a blowout. Obama had hoped to do better. I know he had Ted Kennedy's endorsement shortly before this Super Tuesday, but Hillary Clinton's going to win by double digits nonetheless. But Obama will make up for that in the Minnesota caucus, where he's going to find some liberals that will vote for him there in that caucus in Minnesota, getting just about a 2-to-1 victory there. Missouri, pesky Missouri, we saw it very close on the Republican contest when we were looking at that last episode. It's also going to be very close here, about as close as it can be. The delegate count is going to break even Steven there, 36 apiece, with Obama getting a slight victory in the popular vote. New Jersey, Hillary Clinton's going to win. It's close to her home state of New York. New Mexico, she's going to win, as that also will have a large Hispanic population there, bordering Arizona. And New York, her home state, she's going to win there. But it could have been worse for Obama. We see these other home states like Illinois, Arkansas. We'll look at Hawaii later, where there's going to be much larger margins. New York is going to be the closest of those home states. So Hillary Clinton does win. She does get more delegates, but it's not going to be a knockout blow for Obama. And we're going to see him doing good in that North Dakota caucus, maybe gathering up those remaining prairie populists and getting them to turn out for that caucus in favor of him. But Hillary Clinton is going to do better in Oklahoma, where she's going to beat Obama. She's also going to beat him in Tennessee. So doing better in some of these mid-southern states, Hillary Clinton is. Those were states that maybe John Edwards might have done well in before he dropped out, and Hillary Clinton is going to end up getting, I think, a lot of those former Edwards supporters to vote for her. And then last we see Utah, and we remember from the Republican contest that we looked at last episode, Mitt Romney absolutely blew away in Utah, and a lot of those Republicans and a lot of those Mormons were focusing on the Republican contest. But remember, those liberals that live in Utah, those Democrats, they can be very liberal. They can be a lot of environmentalists, a lot like Colorado in that way, a lot like some of the other Rocky Mountain states, Idaho, for example, and we see Obama doing better there. Now, it's not going to be as much of a blowout for Obama as it was in Idaho, because Utah is a primary and it's not a caucus. So his ability to rake in these really huge margins that he does in some of these states like Alaska, like Idaho, like Kansas, like North Dakota, those were all caucus states. Utah's a primary. He does win a solid victory, but not as big of a landslide as some of those other states. So coming out of Super Tuesday, both of them are going to be pretty close in delegates. I think Obama's going to have a slight lead, but only slight. He's not going to have enough of a lead to be able to call himself a clear front runner. It's not like with the Republican contest. Coming out of Super Tuesday, McCain really looked like a clear front runner, clear enough that Romney ended up dropping out despite doing well in many states himself. But the Democrats are not going to be as clear with who the front runner is. Obama's going to have an ever so small advantage, but Clinton had won her share of states and had won her share of delegates. So I want to take a few moments here to analyze the demographics a little bit more. I've kind of touched on some of this stuff, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. Now, there would be an age difference and a gender difference with the supporters of these candidates. As I've talked about a little bit, Obama tended to have more support among younger people, and Hillary Clinton had more support amongst older people. And there was also a gender gap, with Hillary Clinton getting more support among women and Barack Obama getting more support among men. But when we look at both of those factors together, I think it's pretty interesting. If we look at silent generation folks, now these would be folks who were born, say, in the 30s, early 40s. They would have been the retirees in 2008. They tended to support Hillary Clinton over Obama, and that was true of both men and women. On the opposite end, the younger people, the younger voters at this time were millennials, and both men and women tended to support Obama over Clinton if they were millennials. Where there was a gender gap tended to be with those two generations in between, baby boomers and Gen X. With those two generations, you would have a lot more men supporting Obama and a lot more women supporting Hillary Clinton. And that would probably be more true as we looked at the two ends of that spectrum. In other words, older baby boomers, you might have seen more men supporting Clinton, whereas younger Gen X women might have supported Obama a little bit more. So I think it's interesting as we look at these different demographics. Age and gender, sometimes there was more of a gap if you look, if it was young men versus young women, older men versus older women, or kind of middle-aged people. So I just thought I'd kind of note that here. And then social class and education would also be an interesting thing to look at. We would tend to see that more educated people tended to support Obama, and folks with maybe less education, less higher education, tended to support Clinton. Now, earlier on, it looked like Edwards was getting the support of some of these less educated voters, but at first it seemed like a lot of them might end up going to Obama, but at the end of the day, they started going to Clinton, and maybe that depended on the state. I think a lot of these mid-southern states like Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, a lot of the voters in those states, maybe with not college educated, maybe not even high school educated, they would end up kind of going over towards Clinton, whereas maybe in some of these Rocky Mountain states, they tended to vote for Obama more. And then race and ethnicity would be another factor, and something that I haven't really gone into yet. Obama was running to be the first black president, so he had a large amount of support amongst blacks throughout the country, and I think that could explain why in certain states, especially in the South, he was getting these large margins, because black voters were voting for him in very large numbers, and in states where you had large black populations, especially amongst Democratic primary voters, think Georgia, think South Carolina, those would be two good examples. We're going to see Obama getting very large percentages in those states. Now, Hispanics, on the other hand, are going to tend to support Clinton, and there was some speculation early on that maybe Obama had a shot at it, but as the election moved forward, we would see Hispanics going with Clinton. Hence, we see her winning states like Arizona, New Mexico, California. I think a lot of that was with large percentage of votes amongst Hispanics going towards Clinton, and Asians would go towards Clinton as well. Now, in some states, Asians would be a bigger factor than others. I think in California, it was a pretty big factor indeed, with Asians going towards her, and I think that helped her win California, whereas, as I was saying, a lot of the white voters were tending to vote for Obama in California. So moving on February 9th, we would see a few more primaries. Now, remember, coming out of Super Tuesday, there was no clear frontrunner. It was pretty close in delegates, but what we're going to start to see is these next few primaries that are going to happen, we're going to see a change. We're going to see Obama start to grow his lead starting with February 9th, and we're going to see Louisiana, another one of these deep southern states with a large black population, and we're going to see him get a pretty sizable victory. Now, it's a primary, not a caucus. caucus, so his margin isn't huge, but it's pretty big. It's a more than 20-point victory, so he's going to get 10 more delegates. So if he's got a small lead so far, he's going to expand that lead now by getting this win in Louisiana. Now we're going to see another caucus, a Nebraska caucus, and we're going to see Obama winning Nebraska. We saw him do well in other prairie states like Kansas, North Dakota, so he's going to win this caucus in Nebraska, continuing to expand on that lead. And then the Washington State caucus, so another western state, this is a northwestern state. Obama's going to have a clear victory, a blowout victory in Washington State, and that's going to be a big difference because he's going to get a 2-to-1 advantage in delegates and really start to create some distance now with Hillary Clinton with this sweep on February 9th. So now he's kind of starting to look a little bit more like a front runner, and going into these next contests, it's going to further solidify that. So on February 10th, Maine is going to have its caucus, and we're going to see Obama win there. So that's 4 states in a row, and the narrative is going to start to change about whether or not this is a race that's anybody's ball game or a race where Obama has the advantage. And now on February 12th, we're going to see the dynamic change even further, and we're going to see Obama get a very solid victory in Virginia, almost 2-to-1, and that's a pretty big state, a lot of delegates there, so he's going to continue to expand his lead. Same thing with Maryland, another state where he's going to do very well, getting a solid victory there, and he's going to also get almost a 3-to-1 victory in the District of Columbia. So now we're looking at 7 states in a row Obama is winning, and these states here, okay, these ones have a pretty large black population, but some of those states we were looking at earlier, like Maine, like Nebraska, not necessarily a large black population, but he's doing well in different regions of the country amongst different demographics. So at this point, it is now looking like Obama is the front runner, and it's taken a little bit longer than it did for the Republicans, but not much longer. This is only a week later, so all these states have gone in pretty short succession of each other, and we're seeing now Obama creating some distance and now looking like a real front runner as he's racking in more votes in these primaries and caucuses. And then on February 19th, he's going to continue to have some success. Now, Wisconsin, it is a state with a large white working class population. Hillary Clinton thought that she might have a shot, but it's also a state with a large liberal contingency, especially around Madison, and it's got some black pockets in Milwaukee. So Obama's team was able to galvanize those voters that were for him, and he was able to get a respectable victory here. It's a primary, not a caucus, so a 17-point victory there in Wisconsin was something that really was better than expected for Obama. And Hawaii was expected to be a blowout. That's a caucus, and it's one of Obama's home states. So a 3-to-1 victory there is going to further cement his status as the front runner. So I think that was 9 or 10 states in a row. He's going to be sweeping them and now looking as the front runner. And there's starting to be some talk about maybe Hillary Clinton should withdraw because it doesn't look like she's got a chance. It looks like she's just losing too many primaries and caucuses. So as we look at the polls here, we see Obama getting the advantage nationally in most of these polls, coming into late February and March here as he's got the advantage. And Hillary Clinton is ahead in one poll there, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, but most of them are showing Obama with the lead, although the CBS poll towards mid-March, it's somewhat close there. But it does look like if we kind of average these polls, Obama would have a slight advantage. So it looks like the Democratic primary voters are starting to support him more and more. Now, coming into March 4th, though, we're going to see a different story as Hillary Clinton is going to see some states where she's going to think that she has some advantage with the demographics that are supporting her. So starting with Texas, now that's a southwestern state, a large Hispanic presence there. Now, Texas is going to be kind of weird. They're going to have both a primary and a caucus, and it's a large state. It's the second biggest state in the country, so a large number of delegates at stake. But like I said, there's both a primary and a caucus, and it's weird. It was one of the few states that did that. Hillary Clinton is going to win the primary, and by the media narrative, like this was sort of like her comeback, her winning the second biggest state after losing so many others. But the fact of the matter is she's going to lose the caucus in Texas. And if you look at those delegate counts, Obama is actually going to get more delegates out of Texas than Hillary Clinton is, even though she's going to be said to have won the Texas primary, which she did, but she did not get more delegates out of Texas. Now, Rhode Island, a smaller state, she is going to win there, a state with a large white working class population, so it's a demographic that's suiting her. She's going to start to get a little bit more momentum. She's going to start to rebound. Her supporters, like I said, they were kind of a lot of diehard supporters, dyed-in-the-wool Hillary Clinton supporters out there. So despite the momentum that Obama was gathering, a lot of those supporters were sticking with Hillary Clinton, and we see her winning victories in both Rhode Island and Ohio. So impressive victories, yes, but not huge margins where the delegate count is going to make a big difference. Ohio is a pretty big state. Hillary Clinton's winning, but the margins are somewhat close. The delegate difference is only 7, so it's not going to make a difference as we look at all those states Obama won and the delegate differences that he was racking in during that time. Now, the one state here on March 4th that Obama is going to win outright is going to be the state of Vermont, where it goes 59% to 39%. And it is a state with a large white working class population, but it's a state that Obama manages to win nonetheless. Then on March 8th and March 11th, respectively, we see Obama bounce back with a couple of victories here, winning the Wyoming primary and the Mississippi primary. And if I'm not mistaken, if we looked at those states, the ones we looked at in the last slide and these ones together, the delegates are pretty much a wash. So while it was painted by the media as a comeback for Hillary, it really wasn't that much of a comeback, as we see Obama kind of picking up some victories here a few days after Hillary Clinton did a little bit better in those March 5th states. But there's going to be some controversy, which is going to drive up some of Obama's negatives, some information about a pastor that had supported Obama and had been something of a spiritual advisor to him is going to come into some controversy. Some speeches that he made where he was very critical of America are going to come out. His name is Jeremiah Wright. So there's going to be a lot of video footage of Jeremiah Wright saying some very controversial things, some very anti-American things, and this is going to hurt Obama as we get into this period where there's not going to be any contest for about a month. And it's going to cause people to start to look at Obama a little bit more. He's sort of the presumptive front runner, but now some voters are going to start to get some buyer's remorse, and his poll numbers are going to start to drop, particularly the poll numbers. If you look at the matchups against McCain, it had been that Obama was doing better against McCain than Hillary Clinton was, but at this point, as we start to get into April with a lot of this Jeremiah Wright controversy, it's actually going to be the one moment where Hillary Clinton versus McCain, she's doing a little bit better than Obama is against McCain, and she's going to use that as an argument why the remaining delegates should go with her, including the super delegates that could conceivably put her over the edge. So Obama is going to try to bounce back and try to change the narrative, and he's going to get the endorsement of Bill Richardson during this period to try to, clear up some of the wounds, try to heal some of those wounds. Getting Richardson's endorsement is going to help him get some positive publicity after the negative publicity that came from Jeremiah Wright's controversy. And then we're going to have the Pennsylvania primary on April 22nd. So we have a state here, a large white working class population. Hillary Clinton is going to win by about 9 points. So she is going to get more delegates. So a respectable victory, but not a large enough victory to overcome the delegate disadvantage that she had because of all those losses earlier. And then the May 5th, the May primaries, we're going to see Hillary Clinton win in Indiana, a state that is next to Obama's home state of Illinois. It's going to be close, but she is going to get a victory. Again, it's going to be a victory that's going to help maybe her spirits a little bit, but the delegate difference is not going to be large enough to really make that much difference. The delegate difference in North Carolina is going to be much bigger, and Obama is going to get a very healthy victory there on May 6th. Then Hillary Clinton is going to win in West Virginia, a smaller state with not as many delegates, so it doesn't change the equation all that much. And same thing with Kentucky. Hillary Clinton's going to get a solid victory there, but Obama is going to win Oregon on May 20th. So kind of balancing out, we see Hillary Clinton maybe doing a little bit better in May than Obama, but not enough so to really change the equation all that much. So after a few more contests, they will split, with Hillary Clinton winning South Dakota and Obama winning Montana. Basically, Obama is going to be the presumptive nominee. Hillary Clinton is going to end up endorsing him, though doing so with some reluctance, but eventually she does come around, and it's going to be Obama versus McCain in the general election. So when we pick up next episode, we'll talk about that general election in more detail. If you enjoyed this, if you liked it, so be sure to hit the like button and share the video. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts. I'd love to hear people's points of view and their different perspectives.